I have been fascinated with the world of engineering and the triumphs that we have conquered. We have conquered the seas with ships bigger than most towns and conquered the skies with aircrafts that can move small villages. But there has always been one thing in between that has always been on my mind. These machines, which are neither boat nor aircraft, create its own way of moving across land and sea, seamlessly making you believe the future of hovering is a reality. You could almost say though that this didn't quite take off. Most of you would have heard of this, and very few of you would have ever experienced this. These vehicles, big and small, led the way into the future of faster transportation. Today, I'm talking about the hovercraft. The hovercraft can trace its beginnings back to the late 19th century, where a shipbuilder, John Thornycroft, patented a design similar to the one you see on screen today. Thornycroft's design would push air underneath a wing-shaped boat, causing it to just float ever so slightly above water. Thornycroft's design was actually plagued by the engines at the time. As we know, engines back then were not so reliable and not so powerful. This was just before the time of the Wright brothers' first flight, and, well, we all know how that went. Between then and now, there's been various designs of the wing-shaped boat, but none quite like the hovercraft. The hovercraft was versatile, fast, and most ultimately, really cool. Moving forward to the late 50s, there had been a design declassified by various British militaries that had been testing a new design of craft. This craft was called the SRN-1, which was actually designed by a gentleman called Christopher Cockerell. Cockerell was a British mechanical engineer who spent most of his time designing and developing ways of increasing speed across water. Believe it or not, ships today only travel around 20 to 30 knots. That's 23 to 34 miles per hour. For Cockerell and most today, this is not fast enough, as everyone wants to get to their destination quicker. From then on, Cockerell started designing the SRN-1, first initially proving the concept with 2 tin cans and a vacuum cleaner, would then go on to sell some of his possessions, where he would use the money to develop a full wooden prototype. This wooden prototype Cockerell would take to various private shipbuilding shows, but these proved largely unsuccessful. It wasn't until 1958 where the National Research Development Corporation, the NRDC, would then fund the first full prototype. For those of you who don't know, the NRDC is a British government-owned research department, which was largely funded by the British Army, the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force. You may be curious to why there were so many fingers in this pie. It was largely due to the potential advantages the hovercraft had to offer. See, the hovercraft could go from sea to land seamlessly and could potentially drop troops right to the front line. This upper hand potential is realised when you look back in history. The Normandy landings in World War II were plagued with men being shot even before they had reached the beach. This was due to the landing crafts not being able to get close enough, meaning the soldiers had to swim the last 50 yards or so. The first public viewing of the hovercraft would take 4 men at the top speed of 28 miles per hour, and just a week later it would complete its first channel crossing between Calais and Dover. This crossing would prove majorly successful for the hovercraft, where aviation and shipbuilders alike all wanted a piece of the pie, but there was one big issue for these companies: the name. The name hovercraft had been trademarked by Christopher Cockerell's company at the time. See, the NRDC realised the vast potential in the hovercraft and created the British Hovercraft Corporation, who then hired Cockerell as the technical director. This would mean other hovercrafts would actually be called other things, such as Naviplane. Interestingly, the Naviplane was actually developed by a French man called Jean Bertin, who actually saw a flaw in the design of the singular skirt that would go around most hovercrafts, and then invented the multi-skirt design, which was a number of small cylindrical skirts that would go round the hovercraft. This would mean if any were to rip, tear or pop, would mean the hovercraft can still be used. From then, Bertin developed the N500 Naviplane, which is actually capable of transporting 400 passengers, 55 cars and 5 buses to the max speed of 74 knots. This was actually done across the English Channel and was a record at the time. Bertin's Naviplane though was actually rejected by operators due to the unreliability. As you could imagine, the British Hovercraft Corporation saw this as a challenge to beat, and they did. They created the SRN-4. The SRN-4 actually became one of the biggest commercially operating hovercrafts, with the one you see on screen now being the last surviving relic. This is the Princess Anne. Princess Anne actually weighs 300 tonnes and is 55 metres long. It can carry 418 passengers and 60 cars. It would take approximately 35 minutes to get across the English Channel, and this would remain in use until the late 90s, where where we saw a decline in the use of the hovercraft. And if you're interested in seeing more of the Princess Anne, I've got a lot more footage, so please let me know in the comments below. Now, if you've been wondering how a hovercraft works, it works by a fan pushing air downwards into the skirt, causing the skirt to inflate. The inflation of the skirt would allow some of the air to escape from the bottom. This would quite literally create a cushion of air. This cushion of air would allow the craft to effortlessly move. But you may have seen a problem. If you're being pushed from the bottom, then how are you moving about at all? Well, that's where the rear propulsion fans come in. They're actually able to steer the craft in a variety of directions. A few UK and French based travel operators would utilise the hovercraft from the late 60s up until the early 90s, where they start to see the decline in ticket sales. This was due to the higher operational costs pushing ticket sales higher and it being more economically friendly to the pocket to travel across the channel by ferry. This is all without mentioning that in the early 90s the Eurotunnel opened, which was a train that travelled under the sea to France. So where are we now? Well, on screen right now is the Grifton Hoverworks 12,000 TD, which is possibly one of the last few commercially operating hovercrafts in the world. It is run by a company called Hover Travel, who allows travel between Southsea Portsmouth to Ryde on the Isle of Wight by hovercraft. This journey only takes roughly 10 minutes and it will set you back £30 for a return ticket. Now, if £30 sounds too expensive for a 10-minute journey, let me tell you it's on one of the last few commercially operating hovercrafts in the world, and you cannot find this opportunity anywhere else in civilian life. Now you may be thinking this was it for the hovercraft, but let me tell you that it's not quite true. The hovercraft is still used in militaries around the world, such as the US Navy's LCAC. Planning on covering some of the military uses of the hovercraft in a later video, and let me tell you they only get bigger and cooler. So if this is something you'd like to see, hit the subscribe button now. I'd also love to give a shout out to the Hovercraft Museum. It is the only hovercraft museum in the world and you can see it in Lyon-Solent. This museum has hovercrafts which are no longer in operation and would normally have been dismantled and destroyed. Anyway, bye for now.